Hello, and thank you very much for taking the time to attend this information session. I know that you could be out doing something enjoyable, and we will attempt to make this enjoyable as well. Today, I'm going to be talking about a topic that I call a path to a good life. Let's get started here with a little bit about me and my company. I work with an outfit called Paragon Mortgage, so I'm actually a mortgage broker, and the company that I work for has been consistently ranked among the top mortgage brokerages in British Columbia. That's based on the volume of mortgages that we fund every year. Now, last year, we funded over $1 billion in mortgages in BC. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, the prices, especially in the Lower Mainland, have been very high. And as a result, people need more money to buy these properties. But also, a bigger factor is that a lot of our clients are investor clients. And when we show those clients how they can buy one property, and that property usually works out, within a couple of years, we're usually able to help them build a portfolio of 3 or 4 rental properties. So we specialize in portfolio building. We are mortgage brokers, but we usually start with a plan in mind. It's not just about the transaction, it's about building something for you and your family. On a more personal note, I grew up in Alberta and moved to BC at a young age with my family. I went to school out here and I got my business and economics degree, and I studied financial planning. During the same time, I started working to help pay for my school, and I also bought a property with some family. I noticed that in about 4 years, I was able to save about $20,000, which I thought was a lot of money. During this same 4-year period, the property that I had purchased had actually increased in value by about $80,000. And I found that very surprising that myself working and paying my way through school, I was able to save up $20K. And in that same period, this property had gone up almost 4 times. What I also found pretty interesting was that in all of my financial planning course materials and books, there was not one single mention of wealth creation through property ownership. When you're a financial planner, what you're trained to do is you are trained to sell financial products. That is life insurance, stocks, bonds, mutual funds. But there's no chapter on how to help your clients buy real estate. And I thought that was really interesting. In my young life to that point, I had made most of my wealth in that one property. And when I looked at my circle of friends and their families as well, it appeared that most of them had made most of their wealth through property ownership as well. I was lucky enough to learn a lot from some people that are much older than myself who had developed some strategies along the way and were very successful at it. And today I'm going to share some of that, some of what I've learned with you, and show you how you can implement it for yourself. Okay, before we jump in here, I have to put up my standard disclaimer. This is not advice. These are my opinions. Opinions are like armpits. Everybody has them, and most of them stink. So I need you to keep that in mind as we push forward here. Today we're going to be talking about the investment options that you have. What are they? Why one may be better for you than the alternatives, and how knowing this can accelerate you on a path to a good life. Now, why are you here? Why are you here listening to me when you could be doing thousands of other things? I'm going to guess that you are here for one of 3 or 4 core reasons. You're likely here because you want to learn about how some of my clients are able to pay off their mortgages in 10 years, or half the time that you're currently on pace for. Or maybe you're here because you want to learn how some of my clients are putting their kids through university without it being a strain on their household cash flow, without missing holidays or having to budget. Or maybe you're here because you want to learn how some clients are building extra wealth for retirement. These are the 3 standard questions that I've been answering for probably about the last 10 years. But in the last 2 or 3 years, there's one more question, which isn't on this board, but it's becoming more and more of a question and a problem for people. And that is, maybe you're here because you want to figure out how you can get your kids into the middle class as you know it. Because property ownership has always been, I guess, a signature of the middle class. And the way things are right now with property prices, the reality is that if you want your kids to own property, you're going to have to help them. And that is the reality that we are facing moving forward. So I'm going to start off and answer these questions now. what are the safest ways that you can invest your money? Well, this is something that's been instilled into most of us at a young age by our moms. Save money. Now, how do we do that? We have either savings accounts or GICs. Now, what is the average return on a 1-year GIC or a savings account? To make my math simple, I call this 1%. Now, there might be more, there might be less, but it's somewhere in that range. Now, this is what that means, that if you had $10,000, what would your average return be? $10,000 would become $10,100 in a year from now. Now, that $100 is your gross profit, but it's going to be taxed. Now, it's taxed as income. Now, let's say that you fall into the standard bracket of 30%. That means that you're going to be getting a net return of $70 or 0.7% rate of return. Now, we also have to look at inflation. Again, just to summarize here, your 1% becomes a net return of 0.7%. And now we're going to take a quick look at growth. Now you've got a 0.7% positive return. The inflation average, which you have to take into account, is about 3%. Now that total bread, that bread that you bought from the grocery store, the price was $3 yesterday. Next year, it's going to be $3.09. So here's the net effect. Your net effect is negative 2.3%. So in 12 months, your $10,000 which is going to be $10,100 is now going to have a buying power of 9,770. So savings really is a diminishing of your cash reserves or your buying power over time. Now, please don't take this as a message from me telling you not to save. Saving is important, but saving itself is not what's going to get you to the finish line. It's not going to build a retirement for you. A big issue with this type of savings is that we get income, but we get zero growth. So while we can get a return on our money, the asset itself is not growing. And what I learned as my time as a financial planner is two things. One, we must control the assets that both produce income and grow in value. And two, we also must look to expand and control more of what we have now. Because $10,000 is good, but if that $10,000 could be leveraged into $200,000 into the right asset class to be able to produce income and grow in value, then that may be something that you should consider. If you leave here with nothing else today, I want you to leave here with the clear understanding of this next slide here. This here explains to you how banks make lending decisions and how banks rate risk depending on investment classes. This is super important because banks, every 3 months, they make $2 billion in profit. Now, I want to know, and I think you want to know as well, what the bank thinks and how they think and how they make their decisions so that we can copy them. Now, back when I was in the bank as a financial planner, we used to have clients who used to come in and they would have $100,000, be it from cash or they might have gotten an inheritance or insurance payout. In most cases, however, it was in the equity of the home that they lived in. So they'd come to us with $100,000 and we'd explain to them that in this world, there are 3 things that you can invest your money into. You can buy a business, buy some shares, or invest in a property. Now, I understand that there are many other types of investments, but everything that you might be thinking of is pretty much a derivative of one of these 3 things. So let's look at the options. You have $100,000. You have to choose where you want to be putting your money into. Now, I want you to imagine that tomorrow you walk into your bank, the bank that you've been dealing with for the last 20 to 30 years, walk in with your $100,000 in your bag, and you throw it down on the bank manager's table and you say to him, "Hey, Mr. Bank Manager, I've been banking here forever. My family's been banking here forever. I've got great credit. I pay everything on time, and I would like to buy a business. Here's my $100,000. How much will you lend me to go off and buy a business?" The bank is very reluctant to lend you any money to purchase a business. And it's because the majority of independent businesses, they fail within the first 5 to 10 year period. But let's just say that this bank was being generous on this particular day and we're willing to give you $100,000. what would that mean for you? What would it look like? So that means that now you've got $200,000 in your pocket and you can go out and buy a $200,000 investment. Now, keep in mind that what we're trying to do here is we want to buy an investment, a passive investment. At $200,000, do you think that you've bought a turnkey business where you can give the keys to a 16-year-old and walk away and that business can run itself? Or do you think that it's more likely that you've just bought yourself a job? Well, at $200,000, you're more than likely buying a job. Buying a business that you are going to have to work in. Now, you probably have a job that you like, so you don't really want or need this. And it's probably not a job that's going to be 9 to 5 job either. Anybody who's self-employed will tell you that it is a 9 to 9 and weekends as well type of gig. So while it is an option, it's not the option that most people will take. Now, don't get me wrong. The majority of my wealthiest clients are business owners, but they do own businesses worth a lot more than $200,000. Okay, so that's option one. We say, thank you, Mr. Bank Manager. Thank you for that offer. Now let's just look at option number 2, which is shares. So this time, Mr. Bank Manager, I want you to go out and I want you to go out and grab your number 1 financial planner and I want you to bring her into the room. I'm going to give her my $100,000. How much will your bank lend me to invest with your number 1 financial planner? I'm going to give her my $100,000. In fact, if she tells me just to buy your stock on the TSX, I'll listen to her and I'll buy it because I trust you guys and I know that you have my best interest in heart. How much do you think that your bank will be happy to lend you to invest with their financial planner, with their best financial planner? The answer is most likely 0. Now, there are a few exceptions to this based on net worth and how much you hold with the bank, but ultimately for regular people, the answer is 0. But again, let's be generous and let's say that your bank is willing to lend you $100,000 and match your investment. That would now mean that you have a $200,000 stock portfolio or a managed fund portfolio. So that's all good. We're pretty clear and we're following along so far. The next question is, Mr. Bank Manager, thank you for those 2 options. Let's talk about a property. I'd like to buy a property. I have $100,000. I don't know where this property is. It could be here. It could be in Abbotsford. It could be in Squamish. It could be in a different province. I don't know if it's going to be a house, a duplex, a townhome, or a condominium. I haven't decided on that yet, but I'd like to buy a property. Now, as long as you qualify, can you guess how much your bank will be willing to lend you to buy this property based on your $100,000 down? Well, the answer is $400,000. So you can go out and actually buy a property worth $500,000. At this point, I want you to ask yourself this question. What does it tell you when your bank is only willing to lend you maybe $100,000 to invest with their financial planner versus $400,000 to invest in property? Which one of these 2 options is riskier? Well, according to the bank's numbers, shares. According to the bank's numbers, shares are at least 4 times riskier than property, where property is 4 times safer than the stock market. Now, I'm not saying this. The numbers are saying this. And at this point, I actually want you to get a little bit angry because all of this time, your bank is saying, hey, Mr. Customer, come in here, give us your money. You're richer than you think, and we'll look after it. And we're going to put it all over here. This is the message that's being fed to all of us. Now, once your mother allowed you to get out of the saving stage, she said, okay, you can get a financial planner and you can go and put your money here. When the reality is, your bank wouldn't do that. All right, so that's all interesting. Now let's put this context into where we can apply it and make some money. Now let's say your goal is to make $100,000 over a 5-year period. So now that's a pretty admirable goal. So if you want to make $100,000 and your $200,000 business, what are you going to have? Well, you're going to have a return of 50% on that. Now, if you want to make $100,000 on your $200,000 stock portfolio, you'd also need a 50% return. Or put another way, in the stock market, you need 10%, 10%, 10%, 10%, 10%, 5 years in a row. Now, how many of you have ever gotten that? Now, your $500,000 property, you want to make $100,000 in 5 years. What do you need? Well, you need a 20% return over that same period of time. Or put another way, 4%, 4%, 4%, 4%, 4%. Now, who here has actually achieved at least a 4% return on ownership of their property? Well, I'm going to venture out and guess that virtually everybody. Everybody who's owned a property, especially in the last couple of years, has done at least that. So what that means is, to put it simply, you've bought a property for $500,000 a year, and a year later, now it's worth $520,000. Is that reasonable? Extremely reasonable. So that's 4%. The reality, though, is in the GVRD, we've actually averaged more than 5% over the last 60 years. Now, we've had some ups, we've had some downs, but if you look at the trend, the average is up about 5% in growth per year. So that's all good. 20% over 5 years is great. But I've got a really interesting question. How would you like to learn how people are making 25% return on their money in real estate? Here's how it works. So you go out and you buy a property for $500,000. Now, how much of your money is invested into this property as the down payment? $100,000. Because the bank's going to be lending you the $400,000. So let's just say that you get the average 5% increase. So if we get that increase, what that means is your property, which is worth $500,000, is now going to be worth $525,000. So you're up $25,000. Now, remind me again, how much of your money was invested into this property? $100,000. You have a 25% return on your $100,000. I think quite often in real estate, people forget about this. They only look at the asset value. I bought for 500, it only went up 525. I didn't really make that much. It was okay. I think we've been really spoiled, especially with the recent market that we've had. But I think that we have to focus on where this $100,000 would have been if you had not bought this property. Well, it likely would have been in the other two asset classes, right? Most likely it would have been in the stock market through your financial planner. Now, what's a good return that you could hope for from your financial planner in that same year? 10% maybe? That's a stellar year. Most likely 4 to 5%. So it's all about the alternatives. What would you otherwise be doing with your money? This 25% return on your money is tremendous. And just imagine this, that you bought that property as a rental property and you had a tenant and that tenant was paying you every month and you took that money that the tenant's paying you to pay down your mortgage. Now, over that same 12-month period where the property might have appreciated $25,000, you will have also paid down your mortgage usually by about $10,000. So once we add this $10,000 to this equation, you're actually closer to a return of 35% return on your money. This is not any rocket science or voodoo math. This is basic property investing. So what about the risk? Well, we always hear this. I'd rather borrow $100,000 and put it into the stock market than having to borrow $400,000 and putting it into the property market because it's less risky. No, risk is not equal to the amount of debt that you owe. This is what I do know. This is what risk is. Risk is a function of the demand for the asset that you own, the control that you have over that asset, and the exit strategies available to you if you need to sell that asset and get the hell out of there. So let's talk about the risk for the stock market for a second. Now let's just say that a few years ago you owned a stock in the world's largest car manufacturing company. You're probably pretty happy. It would probably be considered a blue chip stock. Now let's just imagine in this imaginary world, this vehicle manufacturing firm was found lying on their emissions testing and using that in their marketing, and they were caught. You know who we're talking about? Well, what happened to the value of their stock? In a matter of days, they lost $20 billion of value. So the demand for that stock, well, it dropped. What about the control? What control would you have had over the value of that stock at that time? Zero. And what exit strategies would be available to you? Well, you could sell and lose your money, or you can hold and gift it to your great grandkids and hope, but there probably won't be any cars by then, so that probably might not be the wisest of choices as well. Now, I laugh at this example, and we all know that the stock market is very volatile. And this is an extreme example for sure, but it just goes to show you that if we're concerned about risk, we really need to be focusing on these questions. So now let's ask this in regards to property. Now imagine if I told you that I knew a city in North America where every year, regardless of whether you like this or not, every year about 100,000 new people moved into that city. Would that be a good place to invest? Well, that's this city that we're in. So when it comes to demand, we happen to be in the path of it. Also, the supply in this city is limited due to physical constraints, such as a border, mountains, and water surrounding us. So we have a finite area in which people can live, and every single year we're getting more and more people coming here to live. Even within this city, we can pinpoint areas which are in higher demand than others. And a good realtor will be able to show you those areas. So we can find the demand. Now let's talk about control. Let's say that you bought a crummy house on a decent street in one of these areas that's in demand or in the path of demand. Now it's not beautiful, but are there things that you can do with your two hands to affect the value of that asset? Well, you certainly can. You can paint, remodel the kitchen or bathroom, or if you're like me, you can pick up the phone and you can call someone to help you because I don't know how to do any of that. But it's in your control. Now, what about exit strategies? Well, in real estate, we've got a bunch of exit strategies. Now, you can rent it, you can sell it, you can improve and increase its value and then rent or sell it. You can change its value and convert it into a duplex, for example, where you might want to put a basement apartment into it. You might rent to own, where you might find a tenant who wants to buy the property from you and who will be paying you a slightly higher than market value rent to live in that property. Or you can increase its value by getting it appraised at a higher value with a bank, and you can pull out the equity. And when you do that, you can do that again and again. And many of our clients have been doing that as well. So some of the common concerns about owning property, and these are valid concerns: I don't want to be a landlord. What if the tenants don't pay or damage the property? I don't want to fix toilets in the middle of the night. Now, these are all valid concerns, and there is a valid solution to all of this. And that is to hire a property manager and get insurance. Now, in real estate, cash flowing properties are definitely what you want to aim for. However, cash flow of $100 or $200 a month in real estate, it's not going to make you wealthy. It's going to definitely help pay the bills, but it won't make you wealthy. Now, what's going to make you wealthy is the compound effect. And here's how that works. Let's just say that in year number 1, you go off and you buy a property for $400,000. And it grows at a rate of 4%. Now, we're going to use this conservative estimate of 4% as opposed to the 60-year average of 5% in the GVRD. Now, that would be $16,000 of appreciation in the first year. So at the end of the first year, your property is now worth $416,000. Now, when you look at that again, we've actually grown accustomed in real estate to numbers that are much larger than that number. But even so, let me ask you, how many hours of overtime would you have had to work in order to earn an extra $16,000 this year? Well, we'd probably be talking about several months of overtime. Anyways, that is 1 year. Now, we end the year at $416,000, and in year 2, we start with that number. And let's just say it grows another 4%. That makes $16,640 because it's compounding. We got a higher number, and that number goes on and on. That $400,000 property at the end of 5 years should be worth $486,000. So you're up about $86,000 around that time. And during that time, you're also collecting rent and you're paying down your mortgage. So you've paid your mortgage down about $38,000. So when we add this together, the net effect on your personal net worth over 5 years is around $125,000. Would you be okay with that? I think most of us would. Now let's just imagine for a second that this property was a negative cash flowing property. Now let me be clear. I'm not telling you to rush out and buy a negative cash flowing property or negative cash flowing properties, but let's just imagine that it was, and let's just say that it was a lot. Now, I don't think you'll ever buy this property, but let's just say it was negative cash flow about $500 per month. Now, over this 5-year period, that would cost you about $30,000. So instead of making this $125K, you will have only made $95. Again, would we still be okay? I think we'd still be okay. Something to point out that a lot of us are already spending an extra $500 a month on things like RRSPs and RESPs. Now, I'm not saying you should go out and you should stop this right away, but I want you to do, and what I really want you to do is I want you to go home and analyze. Are you doing the best that you can with what you have? Because is that $500 a month in RRSPs going to get you $100,000 in 5 years? I guarantee you no. So you see this number? Do you think it's ridiculous? Or do you see it as attainable? Well, it's attainable. It's realistic. It's happening. In fact, a lot of us have experienced this in a couple years, let alone 5 years. So if that's real in 5 years, and we continue to hold this property, this is the number in 10 years. This is the number in 20 years. And this is the number in 30 years, 1.297 million. Now, when I first wrote that number down, I said nobody's going to believe me. Remember, this is buying a $400,000 property, and I'm standing here today saying that in 30 years, that property is going to be worth $1.297 million. Now, before I did my first presentation like this ever, I went and I looked at $300,000 properties, and I went back 30 years. And to make sure that my math was right, all of those houses 30 years ago were worth $60,000, $70,000. That's 4 times less than what it is today. Now, this is 4 times more. Okay, so this is just a projection of history. All right, now, this is really interesting. You know that $400,000 property? Remember, you don't have to put all of that down in cash, remember? We only need to put 20% down, so $80,000 initially of our own money invested. Now, if you were to sell that property in 5 years, here's what would happen. You'd get your $80,000 back, and you'd get back $125,000. That would be the increase over that time. By the way, there will be commission and tax, but we'll put those aside for a second. I'll address them in a minute. But what happens then? Your $80,000 has had a 179% return over a 5-year period, an annualized return of about 36%. As you hold the property longer, that number increases because of the compound effect. Now remember, you invested $80,000. Over here, that $80,000 in 30 years from now has made you $1.297 million. Here are the numbers. After 10 years, your annual return is 40%. In 20 years, it's 49%. In 30 years, that's a 62% annual return. Now, do you know any financial advisors who are giving their clients a 62% return? I know these numbers sound ridiculous, but they are accurate. Assuming that we have this standard of growth, now I can't guarantee that, but even if I was only half right, I think we'd still be okay. This is how I see property investing. You buy a tree, you give it some love, you watch it grow over time, it starts to give you income, and maybe you're good with one, but if you're like most of our clients, once you figure out how the first one is done and that it's doable, then we'll likely build you a portfolio of maybe 3 properties. Or maybe like some of our superstar clients, you might end up with 10. Now let's just assume that you manage to hold these properties for, let's say, 20 years. And in the future, the rents will be a little bit higher than they are now. Let's assume that they are, say, $4,000 a month, which is actually fairly reasonable if you look at the comparables. If you were lucky enough to get into this position, here's where you would be in 20 years. You would have an asset base that would be worth $7.7 million and a monthly income of about $40,000 per month. I can tell you that some of my clients are on this path, but most of them are on the path to about half of that or a quarter of that, depending on their risk profile. But all of them are likely going to be millionaires in the next 10 to 15 years. And that is how real estate investors retire with true wealth. Okay, so where do we start? Well, some of you may already have the cash to invest into properties, or most of you likely have equity in the home in which you live. So let me ask you this. If you're a homeowner and if you had the opportunity to buy one more house on the street when you bought your home, whenever it was that you did buy your home, would you have liked to have done that? Well, here's the thing. Back then you couldn't, because you barely were able to qualify for that one property. But today you're probably sitting on an asset with several $100,000s of equity in it. Your future self 10 years from now is telling you to get off your butt and start doing something now with what you have. Because the decisions that you make today will have a big impact on you and your financial health down the line. So, equity in your current asset. Here's how this works. Let's say, really simply, that you have a house or a condo worth $400,000 and you've got a $200,000 mortgage. And let's say, for argument's sake, that you've got 20 years left on your mortgage. Now, write this number down or just try and remember this. 10 years from now, if you're on pace here, this family, and you keep doing what you're doing, you will have paid your mortgage down to about $130,000. Okay, so this family, through a refinance, we can actually access some equity through this. Here's how it works. We can access 80% of the value of the property, which in this case is $320,000. But now remember, the family has already an existing mortgage owing of $200,000. So what we could really access actually is $120,000 in available equity. Let's say we want to go out and we want to buy that $400,000 property now in our earlier example. We can take $80,000 for the 20% down on this property. Now that's how we go about establishing our working capital for which we go about in acquiring our next property. Now here's how these clients are paying off their mortgages in 10 years, or paying for their kids' education, or building the wealth for retirement, as well as helping their kids buy their homes. A few slides back, I asked you to remember if that family, if they continued down the path that they were going, that their mortgage would now be paid down to $130,000 in 10 years. So imagine that this family went off and they actually listened and they bought that investment property. So they're still paying their mortgage, but they've also gone out and they've got that property. 10 years from now, if they sold that investment property, this would be the gross profit from them selling this property. There would be real estate commissions and taxes to pay for sure, but they would still clear close to $200,000 on that transaction. Could they take that $200,000 and pay the remaining mortgage off of their family home? Yes, of course they could. So how are some of my clients planning on getting debt-free? Well, it's counterintuitive. It's going into more debt in order to set yourself up to get out of debt faster. The next question is paying for our kids' education. Now, if you have kids, this is something that's likely on your mind. Now, you might even have an RESP plan set up. I'll explain this quickly on how it works. You can invest $200 a month, which over 20 years will amount to $48,000. Now, the government will also contribute up to about $7,000. So we have a total of about $55,000 invested over that period of time. And over that period of time, that $55,000 would likely grow to approximately, if everything's going well, about $100,000. So you would be in a position where you would be able to give your kids about $100,000. Now that's pretty good, but here's the choice presented to us. We can give our kids $100,000 in 20 years, or we could give them that $688,000. Now, which one would you choose? This is a reality. Now, yes, it requires more working capital. You can start an RESP up with $200 and that's it. But for this, you need to start up with $70,000, $80,000, $100,000 in order to acquire a property. But if you have this startup, then why would you pursue this other avenue? Again, are you doing what's best? Are you doing the best with what you have? or can you do better? I actually had one client who had 3 kids and he was going down the RESP path. He was paying $600 a month into his kids' RESPs. And once he realized that he just needed to buy one house, that's what he did. And now he's actually enjoying life a little bit more because he now has an extra $600 a month in extra cash flow. And the other question was that for retirement. Then now, if you're 30 years old or younger, then you just buy one house and you wait 30 years and you'll end up with almost $1.3 million worth of an asset. The reality, though, is most of us are not 30 years of age or younger. And I can tell you that most of my clients approach me in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. And they've done everything that they were told by their parents and their financial planner. And they finally sat down to do the math. They see that the finish line of 65 is nearing, and they realize that if they keep doing what they're doing, that they're not going to get there. And that is when they reach out to us. So for those people, what we do is, now we know we don't have 30 years, but we might have 10. So what we do is we work with them to construct a way that where they can buy 3 or 4 properties within that same time frame. And what we end up with is the same net effect over a shorter period of time. So in summary, this is what we talked about today. We talked about savings, and while is it important to save, it alone is not going to get you to the finish line. Now, we talked about shares and business and property, and why property is what the bank banks on. And we talked about how you can use that knowledge to pay off your mortgage, pay for your kids' education, build wealth in retirement. And by the way, that 680 grand that you give to your kids, they can use some of that to buy their own house as well. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Here's my contact information. And if you'd like a free consultation, please feel free again to reach out and we can definitely set up a time.